welcome back to the Earthdawn Survival Guide, the podcast for all disciplines, paths, players, and game masters, with your questers Josh and Dan. I am Dan.
I am Josh.
And on today's podcast, we'll be discussing all things quizzical, because I think we're on Email Palooza, 13, 14, 15, I don't know.
Whatever it is.
We got a long list. Anyway, all emails, all the time, all night long. For this entire episode, we have a bunch of new emailers and some familiar friends. So if you have any questions for us, please feel free to email us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. Our first one comes from Polythemus. This is an old friend. Dear Earthdawn Survivalists, thank you very much for your thoughts and advice in response to my last email. I will try to employ some of your advice to good effect. Since we last corresponded, I have had a 7th person join our campaign as a player.
Nice.
A human beastmaster and her wolf companion. I'm not sure if you have a human beastmaster as a player or as a character, but I'm going to go with the character. Anyway, I have had to go back and review beastmasters. I have never had one in my campaigns before. I know your pain. I do know your pain. I know this has been briefly touched on before, but how might you consider balancing encounters with large groups as it strains the action economy? I want to thank you for the words on player character deaths. I have always striven to avoid any ability for the dice to be deviated from, since the mechanics of the dice rolling are what allows for the surprise and physics of the storytelling as it relates to interactions. This also means that I have often had to create new characters when I have begun campaigns as a player and have never made it past 4th or 5th circle. I also never really knew about the knacks until this most recent iteration, 4th edition, of the game, and since they are the purview of journeyman and higher level play as a result, is there a good timing for introducing them to players? Let's stop with those two questions right now. Take it away, Josh.
Okay, I'm going to address the second one first because it's a little bit easier.
Yeah, fair.
There are a couple of different ways you can approach it. The first one that comes to mind is if one of the players in the course of your regular play wants to try and do something that's slightly outside the box or slightly off book, so to speak, for one of their talents. And this is more likely to happen with non-combat talents, although it could possibly happen in a combat situation. That might lead you nicely into saying, there is this whole other thing that is available that are called knacks that are slightly different or off-label uses or variations on different
themes,
talents.
Yeah.
That's one way you could do it if it happens to come up naturally in the course of your play. The second way that you could approach that, I think, would be if you know what your player character's talent selections and ranks are, you can look in the companion and see what knacks are actually available to them or will be available to them at their next circle up. And just come forward with hey, this is something that is available, and these are examples of what is possible that is available to you right now, to kind of limit the choice paralysis kind of situation that you might run into, rather than dumping a 40-page
a rule book on them
breakdown of everything on there. You don't need to, list all of the rank 8 and 9 requirements because those aren't available yet. And it might be, depending on your group, you might not have choices that are available to everyone. The third option kind of comes about in the course of play if you've got magician characters who are expressing a little bit of frustration through the need to weave threads before casting spells and feeling like they don't contribute as much in a combat situation. There are those so-called cantrip knacks that are available at much lower ranks for magician characters that allow them to do things that basically they count as a simple action while threads are being woven. So it allows them to potentially do something minor in the rounds that they are preparing spells. So that's something that you could possibly bring that up as well, if it's something that is being expressed as a problem by your magicians, or you might just want to wait until a more appropriate downtime stretch to say, hey, this is something that's available. They are optional. There is no requirement that you include knacks, just by the same token that there is no requirement that you allow paths in the game. They can certainly add a lot of interest, but there's a reason that a lot of those are gated at higher ranks and higher circles. That's so that you can get familiar with the basics of things before you start adding on the complexity of things like paths or knacks or questor powers or things like that.
Yeah, totally. So options. Okay, so back to the action economy question. How do you consider balancing encounters with large groups as it strains the action economy?
Yeah, that can be tough because one of the problems that you run into, and this is not exclusive to Earthdawn, this shows up in recent editions of D&D, it shows up in some other games as well, that there is the common desire for a game master to make, for a more specific example, like the final boss or the mastermind behind an adventure or scenario to be a bigger, tougher opponent in order to have them be able to survive against the group. The problem that you run into is that unless you have minions that go along with them to kind of eat things up, a single opponent is typically going to get taken down. That is even more likely the larger the group gets. And you can run into some issues if, in order to counteract that, you make the numbers higher for the bad guy, you could run into a situation where the player characters are going to have a really, really hard time doing anything to the bad guy.
Yeah.
That's a slightly different situation, but something to keep in mind. I'm not sure, but this feels to me like one of those things that is not necessarily an action economy issue, except in the sense that if you've got 7 player characters, in order to potentially challenge them in a combat, you're going to need to have multiple opponents, and each of those opponents getting a turn means that you have more turns that you're going to need to go through each round of combat, which means that your combats are likely to take longer. I think probably the thing that I would suggest first, and this is kind of hinted at or referred to in the GM's guide, and that is that you do not have to have the enemies always fighting to the death, unless you are dealing with enemies that, by their nature, like cadaver men or many horror constructs or things like that, typically will fight to the death. But wild animals, other sort of natural creatures, other name givers are not likely to stay there and fight to the death, barring extenuating or exceptional circumstances. They're likely to retreat or surrender or something like that, depending on the situation. And that is a way that you can reduce the amount of time that the combat will take, because there are sort of end up being fewer rounds or fewer turns overall that you need to play through. At lower circles, it doesn't end up being too bad, because there's not a lot that player characters can do. But once you start getting into the lower journeyman, where you end up with multiple enhancement talents that could be done, in a combat round to, like, for example, the archer.
Yep.
I'm going to anticipate blow, and then I'm going to mystic aim, and then I'm going to, having 4 tests.
Yeah.
3 other things that they do before they actually fire their weapon. That can start to bog things down. That's just something that you'll want to keep an eye on and keep in mind, is to perhaps encourage your players to have an idea of what they're going to be doing before their turn comes around, so that when their turn comes around, you can try and resolve their roles and their actions more easily. And that's just something that comes with practice and familiarity, and isn't something necessarily that everybody is able to do easily.
Yeah.
Make it easier in a sense for enemies to be eliminated, both individually and as a collective. And if you are dealing with enemies that otherwise would be fighting to the death, then you might just want to reduce the numbers of them in order to have that fight go on.
Yeah.
For as long as you feel it needs to. It can be a tough situation, honestly.
It is.
If it feels like your combats are dragging, are taking too long, or eating too much of your game time, then you need to kind of figure out ways to speed that up, make it more efficient, stuff like that.
Yeah. My only suggestion is have all the bad guys go on the same initiative.
Yeah.
That way, as the game master, I'm running all the bad guys, and that way nobody's left out if I have to have them roll, void blow or steal thought or whatever the case may be. So it's everyone's still on their toes and no one's mentally checked out. They're like, I'm done for like the next 10 minutes. I can do whatever I want. That's my first suggestion. Second suggestion is get used to the phrase, choose your action, roll for initiative, or declare your action, roll for initiative. So that way you're getting them in the mindset of thinking while they're rolling their dice for initiative, what they're going to do. And then when it comes to, okay, you're up, tell me what you're doing. So,
and if you know in advance what the turn order is going to be in that round.
Yeah.
Okay, Greg, it's your turn. And Sarah, you're up. You're on deck.
Yeah.
You're up next. Start thinking about what it is that you might want to do, so that they can try and keep people engaged.
Yeah. Or if you say this round, it goes X, Y, Z, A, B, C. That way someone's listening for, okay, this person's done. I'm next. They can get their stuff ready.
Yeah. Depending on what your play setup is like, your space and whatnot, it's possible that you could have a whiteboard, list the order of the characters. The initiative thing is like having the opponents going on the same initiative. I generally do the opponents of the same type being on the same initiative. So if I've got a fight that's got a Questor of Ragok with 3 cadaver men, the cadaver men will all go on the same action turn.
Yes.
And then the Questor will have his own.
Oh, totally. Totally.
Just to kind of maybe break things up a little bit. But that doesn't necessarily cut down on the number of actions or the number of rolls that are going to be made. So it's just a matter of figuring out what you're gonna do and trying to get through it as relatively quickly and efficiently as you can while also making it engaging and describing what's going on.
Yeah.
And obviously you want to be flexible and forgiving with people if they are newer to the game and still kind of learning things.
Totally.
But as people become more familiar with what they can do and more familiar with the system, if somebody is taking too long to decide what they want to do, not being mean about it, but just kind of either moving them along or making a suggestion or saying, do you want to delay your action until later?
Yeah.
Just to kind of prompt them. So yeah, those are all sorts of things that you can do that hopefully will help with that.
Yeah. Trackable them out. See, let us know how they go. Okay, so Polythemus has a few more questions for us. 1. In the 3rd edition Game Master Companion, there is an interesting discussion about special locations, such as the Well of Souls and the Idyllic Gardens. Has there been any additional locations in other publications occurring purely in astral space?
There might be others that are mentioned in the 1st edition Magica Manual of Mystic Secrets, because I think that's where both of those originally came from. That book also has some discussion of some netherworlds and whatnot. There hasn't been anything that has been released for 4th edition along those lines. That is probably something that, if it ever comes to be, would be explored and talked about in the theoretical Astral Gazetteer book that Morgan and I kind of have on our wish list to eventually do at some point. But there are no concrete plans or anything that is currently in development for that.
So then it kind of answers the next question. Have you ever each invented such spaces in your games? I have not, because Josh's memory is far better than mine.
At the tail end of the Legends of Earthdawn podcast campaign, which has actually started releasing episodes again.
Oh, nice.
A ways down the road, we do jaunt into another realm, but it's one that was already sort of in existence in the lore.
Fair. No worries. Are there any creatures other than horrors that might exist purely in the astral plane?
Yes, the Invi, the insect spirits.
There you go. And how might you mask one? How would you throw a mask on top of those creatures? Purely astral.
I would sort of do it the same way that you do other masks. It's just modifications to the
Stats.
mechanics.
Yeah.
And then just think about how what that mask is supposed to represent manifests within that creature. There are also other creatures that you can come up with that just can be astral entities. I mean, spirits as well. They're not horrors and they're astral beings. The creature thing that's in Prophecy, that astral entity that's in that book.
Oh, yeah. That one.
The spirit catcher or whatever they call it.
Yeah.
That's not a horror, but it's also an astral being. I mean, that's the nice thing about astral stuff to a certain extent. It can come from sort of any kind of place, and you can come up with potentially weird things.
Yeah.
And you can just take a mask and put it on there to modify the stats, and then just decide how that might manifest for this particular entity.
Fair enough. Since dragons also become cocooned in astral space during transition to do this, and considering there are named locations to do this, is there a single location that all dragons do this in?
No, there is not a single location. I would say it's probably very common that it is done in or very near the lair of the great dragon that fostered them.
Yep.
But considering that that is the form that they enter at the tail end of their adolescent phase when they're more feral and wild, they probably just do it wherever.
Fair enough.
When the change comes upon them, they might find a safe-ish spot or whatever kind of instinctually and do that, but no, there's not like a single location that they do that.
No.
It's kind of like caterpillars becoming butterflies or moths or whatever.
Totally. If dragons do not survive this transition, would their corpses be collected and burned as in real space, or would they remain present only astrally?
That is a very good question and not one that has any kind of canon answer.
Okay. We can let that lie right there. So, he says question number 2, but that's been like 8 questions so far. So, if the magic level...
To get back to that, I would think that if for whatever reason they do not survive that cocoon stage, I don't think that they would have the ceremony that they do for adult dragons. I think that they haven't gotten to the point yet where they have fully entered dragon society and therefore are not granted the same rights as not the
word you're looking for.
Not the term I'm looking for, but they have not yet sort of achieved the status that would entitle them to that right. RITE.
Yes. If the magic level of Earthdawn has stopped dropping due to orichalcum harmonic machines created by Athera, would the veil between astral and real space be thinner in those regions? And if so, would egress by horrors be more likely in these regions?
Maybe. That is certainly an interesting idea.
It's your Earthdawn.
Yeah.
Play with it.
There really isn't a strong sense of the astral barrier being stronger or weaker in other places. The sort of variation in astral space has to do generally with the amount of corruption and pollution that's present. And that makes things more difficult within astral space, or that is dealing with astral space perceptually or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, certainly those sorts of places could be a very high concentration of magic that might attract horrors or similar entities to them as moths to a flame. But yeah, that could be an interesting plot point if you are going to have an adventure or campaign arc that is dealing with a location like that.
Fair. And second to lastly, do we know where these orichalcum pillars are located? I know Josh does.
Well, we know that 3 of them are on the island of Great Thera.
Yeah.
So there are only the 3 pillars. The other locations are what are called loci, locuses.
Yeah.
Locus singular. That the idea was that there was one under the city of Vivain. There are rumors of them potentially being in other places, but it is not something that was highly detailed because it's something that would be important for a particular story. Popular theories hold that there might be one under the wastes somewhere, and that might be connected somehow to the corruption there. It's possible there might be one under the Badlands, again, sort of connected to that there.
Yeah.
It's possible, although there's nothing in the book to hint at it, it's possible that there could have been one connected to the city of Parlength in some way as a notable Theran city. It's possible that there could have been one connected there. I don't think that one's particularly likely just because of what happened.
Yeah.
But any area where Thera had a long-standing presence would be a place that potentially has one of the nodes of that network.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. Lastly, do you expect to have any future discussion of the book on Cathay or the ideas contained within it? Thanks very much for the podcast and keeping the Earthdawn flame burning. Very truly yours, Polythemus.
We don't have any plans in the development team to address Cathay at any time in the near future. We don't really have anybody that is excited about working on it. So, no, it's possible maybe that we might, a ways down the road, look at the books here on the podcast as potential content. We've got a bunch of other stuff to get through before we get to that.
Yeah.
But that's something that is a possibility for us to talk about the older books on the show, but we don't have any plans to update or develop or anything stuff from them in an official 4th edition publication at this time.
Fair enough. All right, this one's from Tim. Freaking emailer to us. Hi, Dan and Josh. And this time I got your name spelt correctly, Dan. Sorry. A quick thought or two. I was just listening to episode 161, and the Troll Moots had just watched a National Geographic Lost Cities episode on the Incas and various peoples that had come before them, and Josh's description of the Great Sword Valley suddenly clicked. I was having problems with how the trolls survived up there, but now lines of very steeply terraced fields, flat plazas for the huts, and dry docks for the airships, caves back into the mountains, and jutting piers of rock to tie airships for when just unloading, massive stone buildings at the top of mountains for clan gatherings, and this architecture repeated through down the sides of the valley. As I write this, I'm listening to episode 162, and I'm now looking through my copy of Grimtooth's Traps, and his second book as well. Good times. Tim.
Yeah, that's a pretty good image there. It is not impossible, but it is difficult for there to be significant agriculture in the Twilight Peaks.
Yeah.
You know, maybe down sort of in the base of the Great Sword Valley. When you get sort of down off of the steeper slopes of the Twilight Peaks, there could be areas where some agriculture is done. But broadly, that is not something that is a huge focus of Crystal Raider culture. And so it is something that is probably done there, but I think it's more likely that you would have goats and domesticated animals like that are kept rather than growing crops. I think that's the sort of thing that you would be more likely to have is goats and sheep and llamas, alpacas, like those sorts of things, or sort of Earthdawn equivalent thereof.
Yeah.
There are some creatures / animals within the books that could conceivably be semi-domesticated, perhaps. And so I would see more of that happening than growing crops of some sort within that area.
I can see that.
It just feels to me to a certain extent that vegetables don't feature significantly in Crystal Raider cuisine.
Yeah, no.
Maybe more like tubers and hardier things like that are sort of semi-wild, as opposed to the more high-intensity agricultural kind of things that would require a lot of troll hours to raise.
Yeah.
If you want to be honest, legitimate, there would not be potatoes because potatoes were a New World crop. And while it is theoretically possible that the Therans, having traveled more or less
everywhere,
lots of places, might have brought them back, it is easy enough to sort of hand wave some kind of Barsavian equivalent of a starchy underground tuber, yams or whatever, that is some kind of equivalent thereof that might be a supplement, and maybe gathering wild berries or things like that.
Yeah, fair. We're good. All right, on to one from Bart. Okay, this is a long one. Here we go. Hello, my good questers of Earthdawn. This was supposed to be a questions only email, but I felt the need to share some story, so now you have to suffer through it as well. Note to my players, the ones who are just about now facing betrayer, stop listening if you don't want minor spoilers. That includes you, Christoph, aka Anchor, the Orc Gauntlet. I've listened to the horror and troll mood episodes. Yay! I'm up to date with the podcast, and I couldn't be happier with the timing. This is because I am currently running a big mix of adventures glued together with some of my own content. shattered pattern, blades, and terror in the skies, with plans to incorporate empty thrones a bit later. During their pursuit of Rasper Nor and the terror in the skies part, one of the group members, the Nethermancer of course, was marked by the horror, and they've been developing a relationship, air quotes, since. However, right now the group is just closing the Blades part and having to battle the Betrayer. Since I moved the underground river city of Pale Ones to the Twilight Peaks, because story, there have also been plenty of interactions with trolls. Did I mention one of the group members is a troll Outcast weaponsmith, who might also be marked by Rasper Nor via the use of a blood charm that the group Nethermancer created with the horror's help? I had to come up with a reason for the Crystal Raider trolls not to kill the weaponsmith on sight. So, Betrayer, it got loose because of some bad decisions from the party earlier on, turned most of the moots against each other, like badly. The weaponsmith, being a quester of Minbruges, took on the quest of revealing the truth behind Betrayer's machinations and bringing justice to all who collaborated with it. And to aid the weaponsmith in this grand mission, Minbruges has dug up a very old troll tradition not used since before the Scourge, that in times of great need, big dispute, and sorrow, any troll can be chosen as Kara Astral, the Seeker Warrior. Normally, that is a long process for a single champion traveling between moots to prove his worth, but Minbruges cut that short by announcing the coming of one and by marking the weaponsmith with a magical tattoo showing all that he indeed is the Kara Astral. Since this role transcends every other association, no troll will dare to kill him, at least not without hearing him out. The group not only has to deal with the Betrayer, now also sort out the aftermath of his influence, and then do something about Rasper Nor. And there is a growing nest of envy around Landis and Carafad that the group also knows about and has to do something. Nethermancer plans on using his new friend to devise a method of dealing with them. So you see that the last batch of episodes is spot on for me. Wow, do you have a lot going on, dude?
Yeah. That's a nice little bit of justification for not causing a huge amount of problems for your Outcast troll.
Mm-hmm.
I would have it be the case that there are individual trolls or trolls from certain moots that would be more or less inclined to honor that marking or whatever.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I get the feeling that the Bloodlords would probably be less inclined. They might honor it, but they would not necessarily be happy about it.
Oh, very reluctant.
There's also the bit that you could keep in mind with the Crystal Span and the traditions that take place around that.
Yeah.
That would be an area where they could potentially meet with more hostile individuals because of the beliefs and traditions of that being a neutral ground where blood is not to be spilled.
Yeah, fair.
That's another thing to potentially keep in mind for that. It sounds like there's a lot going on, and it's cool how you are
interweaving all those.
Interweaving things and making some decisions to make the setting and the game your own based on what you kind of need to navigate as far as your player characters go.
Yeah, totally.
It's cool.
Yeah. So that's the background. Here are the questions. 1. Troll related. Do you think my story about the almost forgotten troll tradition makes sense, troll culture-wise?
Yeah. I don't have a problem with it. When you start getting passions involved, especially when passions start getting directly involved, you can get away with a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you maintain the variety of reactions that are likely to come about as a result of that.
Yeah.
Minbruges is not necessarily one of the more highly regarded passions, broadly speaking, among Crystal Raider culture.
Yeah.
But the passions are also entities that you do not offend without great cause.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I think it's cool. I think it's fine.
Yeah.
As long as you're not using it simply as a way of simply avoiding the consequences that would face your player character.
Yeah.
It can make things easier, but there should still be some difficulties that go along with it and some politicking and navigating of social situations that probably would need to go along with it.
Agreed. Next, do you think that assuming the quest goes favorably, the weaponsmith could be reinstated into the Troll Society?
It depends on what moot they were from and what the reason for their becoming an outcast was.
Fair. It's an idea that I'm considering, but not sure if it's going too far and reducing the significance of the outcast path. Also, would that path cease giving its talents? If you're welcome to back in, then you're not an outcast anymore.
Yeah, probably, because the whole notion of the outcast path is the oath that they swear to themselves and the code that they live by and uphold in order to access that power. It is possible that they might lose access to that magic as a result. This is a time where I would talk to the player about that and say, do you have an idea of what you want?
Yeah.
Do you want the goal to be reinstatement? Is the character actually interested in no longer being an outcast?
Yeah.
I mean, that is a significant player character thing, and I would talk with your player about it. They may not know, and that's fine if that's the case.
Yeah.
But they might have an idea of what they want to do or how they might want to address that character moment.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can talk with them about it beforehand without necessarily giving the game away, so to speak, but having an idea of what they're looking for, you could lay the groundwork for that objective to be part of the story.
Yeah. I mean, this is mutual storytelling, so by all means, collaborate with them on where they see this going.
If the player is not interested in that as an objective, then you don't need to worry about it.
Totally. Yeah.
But if they are, then you want to keep that in mind and maybe not necessarily make it easy, but think about a way that that might be recovered. And again, part of that has to do with what moot they were exiled from, what the reasons for it were. I mean, we talked about just last week, the followers of Nemar, who are looking to find relics connected or, related to Nemar Firewalker to possibly as a way to demonstrate their devotion to racial honor or to Crystal Raider honor by honoring the one who brought the airships to them.
Totally. So he goes on to proffer maybe a better option would be letting him keep the Kara Estol title until someone challenges him for it, but still being seen as an outcast, just with that additional leeway of not having to fight every time an interaction with Highland Trolls takes place.
Maybe. You're starting to get into stuff that you're going to need to make decisions based on what best suits the scenario and the story that you have developed here in conjunction with your players. I'm not hearing anything thus far that makes me go, oh no, that wouldn't work.
Fair.
You've come up with this tradition.
Yeah.
Whatever decisions you want to make with the way that tradition works in order to facilitate things in your game is fine.
Yeah, seems like it's working.
You're already, in one sense, creating stuff. You just make it up, as long as you're sort of consistent with whatever it is that you decide. But keep in mind, if it is a title that could be taken through challenge, the same way that like the chieftainships of the moots are challenged, you might have individuals that will come up to him during the course of trying to do this to challenge him to take the title, especially if they are ones who don't like the fact that it is an outcast doing this, because if they could defeat him and gain the title, then he no longer has the protection of the title. That is something that could potentially add complications to everything that's going on there. Again, just something to keep in mind. I'm not telling you how you need to do it, getting my brain like, oh, here are the potential ramifications of what this could mean more broadly in the situation at hand.
Yeah, totally. Horror-related questions. This kind of looks like a lightning round. Can a name giver be marked by multiple horrors?
Yes.
Can horrors see other horrors' horror marks?
Maybe.
If multiple horrors can mark one individual, can they hear each other when communicating with the victim?
Probably not. My gut on that says no, except in exceptional circumstances where a horror might specifically have that power.
Fair. All right. Since I took to heart your advice to be careful with horrors affecting player characters, my idea is for the horror to appear to be working with them, helping, but affecting their surroundings and causing trouble at the worst possible moments, and not to take away player agency and derail their character. Thoughts?
Yes, that works great, especially with Betrayer, because that's part of his whole shtick, is not directly affecting those that it has marked, but causing problems and trouble around them in the wake of the areas that they pass through and stuff like that.
Yeah.
In one sense, they are responsible, but they are not directly acting to cause the problems.
Okay. More horror questions. Would horrors feasibly refrain from harming or feeding on a marked individual if they see a potential use of them?
For more intelligent, cunning, patient horrors, absolutely.
Fair. Speaking of Betrayer and Raspenor, are you planning to go through adventure-specific horrors in the show? Just looking for some validation or different points of view.
We hadn't talked about it specifically, to be honest. We were talking before we started recording about what we might start going through once we finish up the sort of current series on the trolls and the horrors. And going through the original adventures is one of the things that is sort of on the list. And I think it would be better to address those horrors within the context of the adventures that they appear in, rather than just talking about them separately.
I agree. Because they're adventure specific, so keep it there.
Which means that we probably wouldn't be getting to them for a little bit yet.
Which is okay. We can share the love. Coming up, like most of it to the end. General rule questions. Are horrors name givers?
No.
Are they creatures? This is important rules-wise. Does creature analysis work on them?
No, creature analysis does not work on horrors. I'm pretty sure. I gotta pull up my player's guide here.
He says, I vaguely recall this being a subject somewhere, but I can't find it.
I am fairly sure. The creature analysis rules in the 4th edition player's guide do not specifically say, but I think... Here's the answer, and I don't have it right to hand. I would look through existing knacks and see if there is a knack that allows you to do that for horrors. Whatever talent it might be associated with, it might be something that's available to horror stalkers. So maybe check in the Mystic Paths book.
Yeah.
But if there is a knack that says you can do this with horrors, then I would say, for the purposes of creature analysis, then horrors, no, are not creatures. And my gut says I don't think that they're supposed to be. I don't think that's the intention.
Fair. When a player makes an astral sight test and fails, does the character know that it failed? Like they know how astral usually looks, right? So if it failed, it could go, I don't see enough here. When can they retry the attempt? Immediately because it just costs strain, or after the duration expires, or something else?
I would say if you are going to allow them to make another test sort of right away, they would need to pay a new strain to make a new test. I think the character absolutely would be aware of their success or failure to do so. I am mildly reluctant. If you're not in a time-stressed situation, then at that point it's just a matter of, well, how much strain are you willing to take? Because if you make enough tests, those dice eventually are going to roll well enough to overcome whatever it is. Yes, there is the cost, there's the strain, but if there's no time pressure, especially if you've got a wizard who can then cast Astral Sense on themselves and not have to take strain for Astral Sight.
Yeah. Lastly, a wish. Can FASA maybe do a collaboration with Skinny Minis to design an Earthdawn set? Could it also be part of a future Kickstarter? Maybe. If you don't know Skinny Minis, check them out right now. I own a lot of those minis and can definitely recommend them. I just wish there was an Earthdawn specific set. Creatures, horrors, obsidian, and windlings. The rest can be adopted from existing, well, maybe trolls too. I use the orc minis for trolls and half-orcs for orcs. All the best and thanks for the effort, Bart.
Okay, so Skinny Minis, I just looked them up, are flat plastic.
Yeah, like acrylic.
Acrylic, yeah. It's got a base, like a slotted base that you put this plastic, this acrylic standy, like two-dimensional thing on, and it's got art on it. Yeah, it's got a front and a back and a picture and whatnot.
The artwork?
I have no idea about the possibility of doing that.
Yeah.
It's an interesting idea. I don't know how
Feasible?
worthwhile it would be from a production standpoint. Like, I think it would be awesome to have, like, you know, a bunch of iconic creatures and horrors and stuff like that from Earthdawn available in tchotchkes like that. But the question would come up, what would be the cost of production of something like that, both from getting the art and the production, and how much would they sell, and how much would they need to sell for what we would expect to sell in terms of numbers to potentially make it worthwhile. And that starts getting into business questions and business decisions and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know, we've got a partnership with Ralpartha Europe.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones who have been producing the miniatures that we have done so far in conjunction with the Kickstarter, the couple of horrors miniatures. Yeah. There was also a set of a Tuskrang and like Obsidian. Like, we had done some miniatures of the sort of unique Earthdawn races, so that there are minis that are available for them. So if we were to look at more of that sort of thing, it would more likely to be in conjunction with Partha than it would be to go with another company.
Fair.
It's cool. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. I'm not sure how realistically feasible something like that would be.
Yeah, I had no idea those existed before, so I appreciate the look-see. Those look cool. This is a new listener, really. Kind of a French newbie. So, hi Dan, hi Josh. I discovered your podcast 2 months ago. I'm French, 45 years old. Even so, I roleplay, RPG, and played LARPs for decades. I had never played Earthdawn until recently. Some friends who played Earthdawn back in the 90s enlisted me to start a campaign of Earthdawn 4th edition. I decided to play a cheerful character, a creepy blood elf nethermancer who loves death spirits and alchemy. I'm also the physician, coroner, medical examiner to be precise, of the party. My partners are used to introducing me saying, he's a bit creepy and goth, but it's just a phase. It will pass. After a few sessions, we are now circles 3 to 4, and we have a lot of fun. We plan to start Prelude to War once our legend will be high enough. I personally like a lot the role the remaining horrors and corruption play in the setup. I also enjoy the fact that Nethermancers are more than just necromancians. I'm looking forward to discovering new talents and spells. I try not to spoil too much what next my character will be able to learn. I'm listening to your podcast in my own chaotic order by picking episodes according to the covered topics. I like the format a lot. Please continue it. And Josh, I like your references to the French history. A few questions.
First off, bienvenue. Brief bit of trivia about me. When I was 11 years old, my mom was studying to get her master's degree. She's a high school French teacher, and was getting her master's in French literature. And to finish that up, studied at a school in Paris. And so the entire family, we all picked up. And for my 6th grade year, 1986 to 1987, we lived just outside of Paris in Vanves. And I went to a French school, went not knowing the language and learned it, and I am woefully out of practice of it. My brain will occasionally drag it back up when I go up to Quebec City, which I haven't done in a while, but when I go up to Quebec, it'll go, oh, I know this, and start dragging things up, but my vocabulary is woefully inadequate at this point. Yeah, that's so... I like France. I had a wonderful time there.
Absolutely.
Questions.
2 questions. Could you please elaborate on what can we perceive from a character with astral sight? Can we know his circle, if any, and if they are tainted?
We did an entire episode on astral sight, which answers those questions.
Since you were chaotically listening.
Yeah. Episode number 57 is our episode devoted to astral sight and astral sensing and answering a whole bunch of questions, including those 2.
Absolutely.
Broadly speaking, I don't like the idea of you being able to tell an adept's circle with astral sight. I think that maybe with a reasonably difficult pattern craft test and enough time to study their pattern, you might get an idea, roughly novice, journeyman, warden, master taint / corruption I would make pretty difficult to just discover with Astral Sight, because making it easy would
kind of defeat the purpose.
And reduce the reason for all of the paranoia and stuff like that when it comes to detecting taint. Obviously, that kind of ability is not super common, but if it was known in 4th edition, there are multiple disciplines that have access to Astral Sight. If it were easy to determine using Astral Sight, then that would be taken advantage of, and that's not something that's ever been part of the setting.
Yeah, fair.
But yes, episode 57 covers a whole lot of Astral Sight stuff.
And you will enjoy that one heartily.
It is both in our regular feed, and actually the episode, the YouTube version of that episode just went up a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, there you go. Are there any blood charms, spells, potions, or other things that would allow characters to see in full darkness? Not only low vision. I love the spell Ethereal Darkness. My party, not so much.
So there isn't anything that would allow anybody to see in Ethereal Darkness. Ethereal Darkness is a special case that it doesn't even allow full darkness to be seen within it.
Yeah.
So even a blood charm or anything like that, there's nothing that can be done. You don't want to spoil yourselves of what you can learn. There is something that becomes available later to Nethermancers that gets around the problems with ethereal vision. If there is not a blood charm that is a darkness version of the astral sensitive eye.
Yeah, there's dark side eye. That's about it.
You've got the astral sensitive eye. You've got the dark side eye. Does that give you low light vision or heat sight?
It allows you to see in the dark as if you had low light.
Okay. I would not have a problem with a blood charm being created along those lines that grants heat sight instead of low light vision, which does at that point sort of get around the full darkness penalty, but that still wouldn't let you see inside ethereal darkness. The very nature of that spell prevents anybody except Nethermancers and high circle thieves from seeing inside the space.
Fair enough. What are the attributes of a summon fog ghost?
I thought
they were
that. I was going to say it's in the books. Summon fog ghost. Oops, that's wizards. Summon fog ghost is a 3rd circle Nethermancer aspect. Okay, yeah. Summon fog ghost is a 2nd circle spell.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There are no stats listed.
Yeah.
There.
So there's not a full stat block. Part of the reason is because of the nature of the fog ghost that's summoned by the spell. Yeah, it is not a full spirit necessarily the way that some other spirits are. It's basically got a mystic defense and a physical defense, and the damage from a single attack needs to be equal to or greater than the effect step. The effect step being what it rolls for attack and damage.
Yeah.
If it is a 2nd circle, because you get it at 2, you can have a 12. It's a step 12 for its attack and damage, and then it will have a 7 mystic defense and a 17 physical defense. It would need to take 12 damage from a single hit, and then it's just disrupted and gone.
Yeah.
For the purposes of that spell, there is not a full stat block that is needed, because it is very limited in what it can do. But you could, outside of the spell, have an ally spirit that is a fog ghost, essentially, and you would just follow the regular rules for spirits that would be created using the ally spirit creation templates that are in the Game Master's Guide.
Yeah, that makes sense. I really enjoy the 5 podcasts, Tales from the Omniverse from December 2020. Any chance to get access to this scenario? I would love mastering it and to have my dear game master play it with the rest of my party. Best regards from France, Moose.
No, maybe. That was a scenario that I originally wrote for Gen Con, because I sort of do an original adventure for Gen Con, or I try to do an original adventure for Gen Con each year. And that was one of the ones that I came up with. It's called Into the Depths. I've got sort of the basic notes from almost all of those on my computer, but they are not in a publishable form. Really, really simple. That version of it had a cadet cadaver man or two, I think, in sort of the pit at the beginning. The beetle monsters that were in that are the care beetles or whatever they're called that I think are in the Travar book.
Okay.
I think that's the book that they come from, and I think I might have slapped a template on them. I don't recall now off the top of my head. And the horror at the end, the tree horror, is basically a reskinned crystalline entity.
There you go.
It's a crystal entity, and then I have the vines that are part of it as individual creatures, but they're actually part of the horror, and I think I was using the stat block for the pumpkin patch horror vines that's also in the Travar book. Those are the stat blocks. Those are the creatures that I kind of used in that. And then the storyline is just kind of the scenario situation plays through the story, and they get into that sandbox of the community and go from there.
Fair enough. All right, we have one final email. This is actually about a horror. Jonathan sends us a story. So we're going to finish with story time today. Hello, guys. I was listening to the last episode, which was about Artificer and Earthgraith, and it reminded me of a campaign a long time ago with another clever horror I used. It was Tempter, and I think you did not cover this one yet. And I'd like to share a story about that horror because it figures in my top 5 best moments as a Legend Master. It happened about 20 years ago, so the memory is kind of blurry, but the main parts are still very clear. One of the player characters had been marked by a Tempter. The group were all aboard their airship when it chose to reveal itself. As Terral, a seasoned human Jean Shi, 2nd edition by the way, was minding his own business in his cabin, Tempter started to speak in his mind. Hello, Terral. Let me introduce myself. I am Tempter, and I just marked you. You and I are at the beginning of a long relationship. If you follow my lead, you have nothing to worry about. You will even become very powerful. But I have to warn you. I know you think about asking the help of your friends in the hope of defeating me, but bear with me. It's not my first rodeo. At best, you'll be exiled from your group and all your loved ones. At worst, they'll end up all dead, and you'll still be left alone with me. Terral didn't think twice and arrogantly warned his friend about the horror. This led to the rest of the party plotting in secret of Terral, thinking that the horror could hear only through the ears of his marked victim. They did not suspect it was physically among them, but too small to be seen. So it let itself be seen while Terral was asleep, but after the rest of the group had nightmares, like foreboding nightmares, a fight started, but it was very short. It was a massacre, but with illusion magic. The turmoil awakened Terral when he got on the deck of the ship. He saw all of his friends unconscious and badly wounded, and then Tempter spoke again. This is what I warned you about. Now will you behave? And from then on, Terral behaved. He even used Tempter's powers once in a while. This is it. I hope you enjoyed. Take care to both of you. Jonathan.
We have not talked about Tempter yet.
No, he's coming up second to last.
That's a good story, though.
I like that one. That's what role-playing is about, is stories. Gotta have all these fun stories. So, that's what we're here for. Not necessarily, I don't remember all the great dice rolls we ever had, but I remember the story that came out of the dice rolls. So, the dice rolls are like the special effects of the movie. They're there to help tell the story. They're not the actual story. If I can badly mangle George Lucas's phrase there. Anyway, thank you, listeners, one and all. By all means, if any of the rest of you have never sent an email in, we would love to hear from you. More short stories like that are fantastic. But if you have any questions for Josh, by all means, send them in to the edsgpodcast@gmail.com. Nobody wants me to answer any questions because I don't remember anything from one week to the next. So until next time, folks, email us your questions for your legend.
Good night, everybody.